This video is brought to you by Squarespace. It's not often that a film revolutionizes the way the industry makes movies, but the sci-fi epic, The Creator, is a defining achievement. But why is this? Well, in an industry that spends close to $150 to $300 million on movies bursting at the seams with VFX and rushed schedules that turn out looking quite bad, The Creator takes a radically different approach. This $90 million film and its veteran director Gareth Edwards challenged the sentiment that to make a movie of this scale, you had to spend Avatar-level money. Through a combination of a $4,000 IMAX approved camera, shooting in 80 locations, guerrilla filmmaking, a small crew, and a different approach to VFX work, Gareth Edwards has achieved something stunning. So let's take a deeper look at how they achieved all this with the incredible production of The Creator. The story of The Creator begins with its writer and director Gareth Edwards, who signed on with producer Regency Enterprises to work on a then untitled sci-fi film in November 2019. And Edwards is someone with an interesting record. He began his role in film in the early 2000s working in animation and visual effects, spending the late 2000s working on TV documentaries, moving on to the director's chair in 2010 with the movie Monster, and going on to direct two more big-budget films, Godzilla and Star Wars: Rogue One. This background in visual effects work gave Edwards a very noticeable skill, an incredible sense of scale. Not just a sense of it, but the ability to portray it visually in a film to the point that it became something his movies are known for, making him a rather perfect fit for something like The Creator.
I used to do visual effects. I spent 10 years doing computer graphics and I was doing it very cheaply in my bedroom, and so I tried to learn a lot of tricks as to how to make things look bigger than they are with very little effort. Like, one of the things that's free, like that's impressive and it's free, is scale. But then what you learn is there's a relationship going on, and that something's only big when it's relative to something else. And that's the key, is always having the something else. If you just have something big, it means nothing. Like, it's what it's also is in the frame or it's relative to.
And really, doesn't every creator deal with trying to figure out scale? From scale for a feature film to scaling your business. But sometimes the tools to get there just don't make it easy for you to focus on scaling the other things you really need to. And that's where our sponsor, Squarespace, comes in with their brand new Fluid Engine. The next generation website design system that allows you to completely customize your site for both desktop and mobile. Stretch your imagination online with Fluid Engine, built in and ready to go on any new Squarespace site. Now you can just click, drag, and move objects around easier than ever to achieve your creative vision for your website. Give it a try today by heading over to squarespace.com right now for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/framevoyager to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The Creator was also a return to filmmaking for him, as after 2016's Rogue One, he essentially took a lengthy hiatus. With The Creator's release coming on September 29th, the gap between his releases will be just under 7 years. Gareth Edwards explained this almost decade-long break, saying, "I needed to get off the merry-go-round." Do you know what I mean? In Hollywood, you can get stuck on the hamster wheel, or whatever analogy you want to use. I just wanted to get off and have a break to take some time thinking about the next thing. After Edwards signed on, he scouted locations in various Asian countries such as Nepal, Japan, Indonesia, and Thailand with a camera and a 1970s era anamorphic lens to get a clearer vision of the setting and style. The production of this would-be science fiction film would be incredibly ambitious, with the budget not only being a constraint, but also a source of serious contemplation. Eventually, though, thanks to those issues, decisions were made that culminated in a, for this industry, fairly cheap film, driving costs down from a projected $300 million budget to around $86 million. And through this production process, we're going to see just how they were able to save costs on this production. But to start with, Gareth needed a team that harbored the correct mindset for the job.
You know, you look at all that imagery and it's incredibly ambitious, and the natural reaction is, this is a $300 million film. You know, there's no way we can really do this. We'd love to do it, we can't really do it. And people say you can't find these locations, you're gonna have to build sets in a studio against green screen, and it'll cost a fortune. And we were like, what we want to do is go shoot the movie in real locations in real parts of the world that look closest to what these images are, and then afterwards, when the film's fully edited, get the production designer James Klein and other concept artists to paint over those frames and put the sci-fi on top. Sure. And everyone was like, sounds great, but how, you know, basically had to go and try and prove it to them, really.
with the core of the message being that while some equipment may be more sophisticated or better on paper, using more complex tools could complicate production. And for achieving the goal of creating a $300 million feature while only spending $86 million, choosing the right camera should not be an afterthought. What came with this more unorthodox approach to high-budget filmmaking was a strategy that involved shooting as many scenes as possible on location, necessitating a lot of globetrotting and a much smaller core team than usual for a high-budget movie. Equally as strange was the choice of camera for this blockbuster, being a Sony prosumer mirrorless cinema camera, the FX3.
We shot The Creator on a new camera, it's a Sony camera, it's called FX3. Pretty much the whole movie shot on this. It's a camera you can buy at Best Buy. It looks like film. It's full frame, full IMAX resolution, and has filmic, like, really photographic quality to it.
This camera is a powerhouse that punches way above its weight, and it sports many welcome features for big budget productions. It has a full frame sensor, which performs well in low light situations and allows the user to shoot in various high resolution formats. But it does make one wonder, why not use another camera, such as the Sony Venice or an Arri camera, for the high profile films such as this one? Cinema cameras come with many great features, have quality of life features embedded in them, or can have some niche functionality, such as the Sony Venice detachable sensor block, the Rialto system. It may seem illogical to go for a mirrorless cinema camera instead of just a fully designed cinema camera rig. However, as we hinted at before, it's good to use the right tools for the right use cases, and lugging a gigantic cinema camera around in shoots that require a dexterous cameraman and only having a small film crew makes an on-paper superior camera such as the Sony Venice sub-ideal.
I do think that there is a balance to be struck as a cinematographer about being knowledgeable about the equipment that's in front of you, understanding why it's better or worse, in your opinion, and then having the capacity, the foresight to be able to say, well, just because this variable is better, it's not better for this project.
Cinematographer Greg Fraser, who worked on titles such as Dune, The Batman, and Vice, small movies, was involved in the making of The Creator during pre-production before leaving to work on Dune 2. His perspective on gear and what is more or less viable for any given production is comparable to Gareth's gear considerations, and the FX3 was the perfect fit for functionality and flexibility needed for this intense filming schedule with a limited crew and budget.
And we were just really fluid, organic. We'd shoot for like 25 minutes at a time, and it was like a very liberating experience. And it looks like a much bigger film than it cost because of that reason. Because of everything you see on screen, hopefully.
And while some naysayers might be a bit cynical about a movie using a lower budget camera, the FX3 has enough in it to get the ready for IMAX certification, with the film being presented in an ultra-wide format, with its trailer showcasing footage in an impressive aspect ratio of 2.76:1.
I was genuinely blown away. When someone told me that we were going to get our film released in SCREENX, I was really dubious. And they hit play. Within a few seconds, I was like, wait a minute, how the hell did they do this? It was really impressive, that 270 degrees view. What you can actually see, your whole vision is very widescreen, and it's way wider than it is tall. I'm just excited that people will be able to experience this movie the way we did when we were all around the world shooting it.
When taking a look at the few glimpses of behind-the-scenes footage we have on the production of The Creator, we can see that the camera is more often than not handheld, with an Atomos recorder attached at all times and the camera being mounted onto a gimbal.
And so we thought, like, when you have like the boom operator holding a pole with the microphone on, why can't you have a person holding a pole with the lights on it? And so we had like a best boy type thing, kind of running around with this, like holding the light, by hand. And so if the actor suddenly got up and did something, went over here, and then suddenly there was a better shot, I could move, and suddenly the lighting could really adjust, and what would normally take like 10 minutes to change was taking like 4 seconds. And it just gave everything this atmosphere of like this sort of naturalism and realism that I really wanted to get, where it wasn't so prescribed, like you're not putting marks on the ground and saying stand there, and like it wasn't that kind of movie.
Looks can be deceiving, and the FX3 deceived many. Despite The Creator looking like a traditional action movie, the shooting process could really only be called guerrilla filmmaking, with Gareth Edwards taking cues from his original low-budget feature, Monsters. And one of the most indie methods Edwards opted for was a rejection of how VFX is normally approached in the industry today. The Creator is a VFX flick, taking advantage of both green screen and ILM's Stagecraft hardware. What was unorthodox, though, about this movie's approach was the locations did much of the visual heavy lifting, with environmental lights, architecture, and geology, for the most part, looking as they were. The movie was then edited, and after the initial 5-hour cut was trimmed down into the final iteration of the film, then the VFX team was allowed to go in and work on the VFX work.
You're sort of lucky to get away from the studio and go to a proper location like a handful of times. On this, we went to 80 locations. We didn't really use any green screen. There was occasionally a little bit here and there, but very little. And if you do the maths, if you keep the crew small enough, the theory was that the cost of building a set, which is typically like 200 grand, if you can fly everyone to anywhere in the world for that kind of money. And so it was like, well, let's keep the crew small and let's go to these amazing locations. And then we did a little bit at Pinewood using the Stagecraft, the LED. Everyone knows it from The Mandalorian, but the non-green screen, LED screen sort of environment stuff.
Stagecraft also adds certain limitations to a shoot that green screen or on-location shoots do not suffer from. Those issues mainly being lighting and the space needed for Stagecraft screen array. As for most lighting, most scenes in a Stagecraft production, such as 1899 or recent Star Wars shows, are rather dark or take place at dusk or dawn. It's difficult to reproduce the lighting scenario of a midday sun, or maybe even something as vibrant as the lava lakes of Anakin's and Obi-Wan's duel in Episode 3. One thing that certainly isn't enough for Stagecraft, though, is the space the actors have available to them. And here we're getting back to the scale and shape problem, and it's something that seemingly plagues Star Wars productions lately. In Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, even though it was on green screen, the sense of scale was greater. Lightsaber duels felt like they could go anywhere and everywhere and were much more dynamic. And while the lightsaber duels we are getting in Star Wars TV shows currently are still great, you can't help but feel the limitations of the volume sets they are using. Even though they take place in open areas, you can't help but feel closed in while watching the fights that seem to be limited in their movements. Also, what's something you notice with almost every set piece for all the shows? Everything is circular. From location to location, you end up in yet another circular area. It's not that volume technology can't be used to good effect, but when it's overused inside a series or in a movie, you really start to notice it, and it really reduces what you can do with scale. But there, of course, is another option. With the creator, most of what you see is real, and it was a considerable challenge to find the locations that more closely matched Gareth Edwards' vision.
When we were in Thailand, it was like, we need to find a really technologically advanced kind of factory or something like this, and we looked everywhere, and eventually we found a particle accelerator, and it's like it's the most advanced kind of thing probably in the whole of Thailand. And we're like, please, could you let us film? It looked amazing. It had that whole circular hub thing going on, and we went to visit, and they were like, there's no way you're going to be allowed to film here. And they sort of asked, what do you want to do? And we went, well, there's people with guns shooting and explosions, and they're like, it's not going to happen, let it go, Gareth, let it go. And at the very last minute, someone was like, what filmmaker is doing this? And they were like, oh, it's this guy from, what films has he done? And they went, oh, he did, I don't know if you saw it, he did this Star Wars film called Rogue One. And they were like, can we be in it?
However, sometimes their presence on location was questioned, especially due to them being such a small crew of people that a lot of people didn't necessarily perceive them as filmmakers working on a big budget movie, resulting in curious looks and inquiry.
I was like, I don't want to see that anywhere I look. Like, we want to feel like we're like a student filming to some extent. And it got to the point where, like, that beach scene you saw, where Gemma's running down and there's all that crossfire, we didn't close that beach. If you look carefully in the background, you can see bars and tourists just carrying on. Not one person came over and went, what are you doing? Because it was just about 4 of us with a camera running around, and it didn't look like this big, massive, movie, because the goal is hopefully it all ends up on the screen. We tried to just be very efficient with it.
For full CG characters, people in gray suits would stand in, moving into place and providing actors a point of reference. And with the astronomical savings Edwards achieved, less time was spent on creating and refining the backgrounds of a scene, which we're not saying that there wasn't work done with the backgrounds, but they're not having to fully digitally recreate every scene. And this allowed more effort to be put into making the robots of this world feel even more real. Put simply, practical was king. If locations, props, and characters are already in the shot, Often no additional work or relatively minimal labor is needed in finalizing a character or environment. The fascinating thing for post-production is that before VFX work was even started, they edited the film to its final version, meaning that the VFX team wouldn't even have to worry about any changes to the film or any other adjustments that could further complicate their work. Also, with this being the final version of the film, as a VFX artist, you're not working on a scene or something that has much of a chance to get cut out of the film, meaning that artists could work very efficiently on this part of post-production. And according to Gareth, this approach saved them countless tens to hundreds of millions of dollars and stands in stark contrast to a lot of heavy CGI and VFX productions from Marvel that you often hear about them making changes even the day of a film going to theaters. Shortly after the trailer released, allegations emerged that the filmmakers had used footage of a real-life explosion as the basis for a dramatic shot in the trailer, where the villainous AI drops a nuclear warhead on LA. This explosion wasn't one the studio carried out for the shot or harmless stock footage, but footage of the Beruit port explosion, a real-life accident that occurred in 2020, killing hundreds and wounding thousands. The final shot could have been a scene that was a little too close to the original source material, or it could have been an oversight in the VFX production pipeline, or it might not even have been a purposeful inclusion into the movie at all. The reactions around this were mixed, to say the least, with some saying that because it didn't show the real-life injury or death, it was acceptable, while others found it to be remarkably bad taste. When it comes to the usage of such material, though, for reference or for final scenes in a movie, there really is no clear-cut answer for what is or isn't acceptable, although efforts can be made to source certain content in a less ethically questionable manner. Ultimately, while the creators team favored more practicality and realism over excessive VFX, this is one instance of realism that they went a little too far, using footage of a real-life tragedy, especially a recent one, for a purely fictional movie. It seems a little bit out of touch, to say the least, and it proves that we may need more discussion when it comes to this side of digital effects in the future. But in a world where we are all still trying to perfect digital worlds, which comes with a lot of growing pains, it's always nice to see a film that chooses to be grounded in reality, aided with the use of visual effects. And let's hope to continue to see more groundbreaking productions that don't need overinflated budgets to create something spectacular and cinematic as the creator. Speaking of changing the game, though, check out our video on the Conjuring universe and how their special effects